Okay, looks like we're going. We're going to be looking at Leviticus number 7. We pick up from 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks. We skipped 1 week. We're still in the offerings that the priests, this is when Moses was up on the mountain and he got these instructions from God on the different offerings and the different types of offerings and what the reasons are for them. And I can really say I'm glad that I don't have to worry about, I mean, we still have to worry about sin. And that's ultimately where it comes down to. And I don't have, can you all hear me okay? I get my microphone, but I forgot it. But it's one of those things that as we get into it this here in just a little bit, we'll find out. And I was reading ahead a little bit too. So many things that you got to remember, and then at the final end, if you found out you did something later, then you got to go do it again. go confess again, you know. So we still need to do that, but we don't have to go through the process of making an offering from a lamb or a goat or a bull or a turtle dove or all that. Okay, verse 1 and 2, and this continues on from 6, of course. It says, likewise, this is the law of the trespass offering. And we talked about this in 5 already, chapter 5. But this goes into a little different detail that it didn't say before. It is most holy. In the place where they kill the burnt offering shall they kill the trespass offering, and the blood thereof shall sprinkle around about upon the altar. And like I said, it's in here, it's added that the blood is just sprinkled around the altar. Some of the other places, some of the other times where they're sprinkling the blood, it's up by the veil. Sometimes it's on the priests, you know, sprinkling it towards the priests. But this particular one, for whatever reason, and we don't know a whole lot about this, there is some Jewish lore, I guess, or they had this one writer that was saying that somehow, and I didn't quite understand it, there was a line kind of surrounding the altar, imaginary line about halfway up. And one of them they sprinkled above the line, and one of them they sprinkled below the line. I don't know what the difference was, but it you know, it's not going to go as far if it's down here. If it's up here, it's going to go a little farther. You know, there's a lot of things that we don't know about these, but we do know that they're going to start doing this again in the end times. They're going to have the new temple, the third temple that's rebuilt, and they're going to start the sacrifices. They're ready anytime, but before they do that, they've got to get ready. And in getting here, we don't see this yet, but they talk about before they can do anything, and we did talk about this a little bit, they had to consecrate all the priests. They had to purify them. And to do that, they had to burn a red heifer. It can't have more than, I think it's 10 or 11 white hairs in it. And it has to be 2 years old. I mean, there's a lot of particularities. And from what I understood, they bought 5 heifers, red heifers, from a man in Texas. And right now, they don't have any white hairs, or just 1 or 2. But they have to be 2 years old, and what some people say is they're going to keep them for 2 years. That way they can say they raised them in Israel, even though they weren't born in Israel. But they haven't had a whole lot of luck, you know, trying to raise them there because they keep having some blemishes and things in them. Anyway, that's before they can start all that, because they got to have the red heifer, they get the ashes, they put it in the water, they stir it up, and that's what they cleanse the priests with. So once they get that started, then they can start the sacrifices again. They can get everybody consecrated, because, not in this lesson, but I think it's the next lesson, we'll find out something that if they don't do it right, what happens? You get killed. So you have to do it in the right order. You have to do it specifically the way God told Moses to do this. And Moses is giving this back to Aaron and his sons so they will know. He's giving them an instructions. At this particular point, none of this is started yet. Okay? I think I said that a couple weeks ago too. They're getting ready. He's telling them, this is what I spent 80 days upon the mountain. 40 days the first time and 40 days the last time, getting these instructions from God, and I want you to do these in specific order. And that's why he wrote these down, for this purpose. And as we talked about before, a trespass offering, what does trespass mean? If somebody's trespassing on your property, what does that mean?
Illegal.
Well, they're on your property and they shouldn't be. Whether you've got a sign up, you've got a big acreage, no hunting, no trespassing, once they cross that barbed wire fence or whatever fence you have, or don't even have to cross the fence in some places because there are no fences, as long as you got a sign up that says, no trespassing, they're not supposed to go past that. If they do, then the landowner can do whatever he needs to do to get them off. This is exactly what God was talking about, the trespassing. Trespassing is the unlawful crossing of a boundary. God has certain boundaries for humanity in general and for his people specifically, and we see that here. When they cross these boundaries, it's called a trespass offering, a sin of trespass. And they need to have a trespass offering to start with the confession. And then it talks about the difference here that is sprinkled around the altar. And the altar we're talking about is the big altar out front of the temple, the tabernacle. Okay? And when they kill the offering, that word kill in this instance basically means slaughter. It's to cut their neck so they can drain the blood and let the blood come out. And then they get the calf, sheep, goat, whatever it is, ready for the offering, that they can cut it up, take the hide off. Brother Epson, 3, 4, and 5. You want to read those?
And you shall offer of it all the fat thereof, the rump and the fat that covereth the innards, and the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them, which is by the flanks, and the caul that is above the liver, with the kidneys. It shall be taken away. And the priest shall burn them upon the altar for an offering made by fire unto the Lord. It is a trespass offering.
Okay. Here again, we read this in chapter 5. So it's describing it again. There are certain differences, as we said earlier, between the sin offering and this trespass offering. It said earlier in chapter 5, it didn't say anything what to do with the blood. Sometimes it says, in all cases, don't drink the blood. In some cases, it was telling us to sprinkle the blood in certain ways on the priest or on the veil. Back in 5, it didn't say anything. So this is just a little more repetition with a little more clarification of what they should do. And the fat that it's talking about is basically, Adam Clark says, it's the fat that was found in a detached state. When you cut them open and the fat's up against the side of the hide, that's what you want. You can't really get the fat out of the meat. I mean, when the fat's indwelled in the meat, marbled in there, you can't get that out. But it's to get the fat where it is, and it's concentrated above the liver and all these different places that they're mentioning around the innards. So with that, that's the particular fat that they're talking about. And says, then the priest shall burn them on the altar as an offering. This was what was normally done. The fatty portions of the trespass offering were burnt on the altar. So this is, again, they're not supposed to eat the fat. There's fat in the meat, but that's not the fat that they're talking about per se. Verses 6 through 10. Sister Janet, would you read those?
Every male among the priests shall eat thereof, It shall be eaten in the holy place. It is most holy. As the sin offering is, so is the trespass offering. There is one law for them. The priest that maketh atonement therewith shall have it. And the priest that offereth any man's burnt offering, even the priest, shall have to himself the skin of the burnt offering which he hath offered, and all the meat offering that is baken in the oven, and all that is dressed in the frying pan, and in the pan shall be the priest that offereth it. And every meat offering mingled with oil and dry shall all the sons of Aaron have, one as much as another.
Okay. And we did touch on this last time a little bit when we was talking about chapter 5, that the male priests, they specifically have to eat this while they're here at the temple, while they're doing, the tabernacle, while they're doing their service. And we'll go into it a little more further here, but it says this trespass offering is a similar pattern, of course, to the other offerings, sacrifices that was made. The blood and the fat belong to God, and the meat portions then of this one could be shared among the priests, with its distribution determined by the priest who actually performed the trespass offering or the sin offering. So that either two of those offerings, they got part of the meat. And whoever was actually doing the offering of them, the priest's particular portion, they would decide who would get to eat it or not. And they would basically, it's saying they got to divvy it up and make sure everybody got a portion of it that was working there. Now the fat, they don't eat that, and we talked about that before, but one of the things, that's where the energy is stored, okay? Fat can be turned back into energy with what? With a little exercise, if you're doing that. Walking, running, whatever they're doing, and that's what the animals would do. For the winter, they would build up fat reserves, so in the summer and in the winter, whenever they needed it, when it was cold out, it would help keep their bodies warm. Everything's moving and keeps them going. It gives them enough energy. Same way with the blood, of course, that's God's, and the life is in the blood. So they didn't want to take the blood, of course. So those two things they would leave out. But everything else, the fat would be burned that was in the offering, and then whatever was left, not everything, but we'll talk about it in a second, but a portion of it that went to the priest, and the priest would divvy it up. It says, with the burnt offering, also in chapter 1, the priest who made the sacrifice was given the skin of the animal to use for leather or another purpose. So, again, the one that's kind of the leading of the sacrifices. Now, you would think that, well, that guy's going to get a lot. It depends on when his turn was, but as we see as we go into here, it seems like they have offering in the morning, they have offering in the evening. These are offerings that the people are bringing forward, and that's the ones they get. We also talk about that back in that time, they didn't have a lot of meat. They would raise the calves, and the goats and the sheep and everything, but for the most part, they would raise them. They weren't theirs. They were somebody, whoever the owner of the land was, and they was just raising them. So that's why they made privileges, or made a way so the people that didn't have calves or sheep or goats, they could still make offerings. Remember, with the turtle doves, and even if they didn't have the money, the poorest of the poor, all they'd have to bring is a grain offering for these particular offerings that we see. And it talks about that again here, those offerings that were baked in the either in the frying pan or in the oven or cooked. Okay, and it goes through that in Leviticus 2:4-7. We talked about that before, and there was 3 different ways that they would do it. You could cook it, like fry it, like fry bread. You could bake it in the oven, or you could bake it in like a Dutch oven or something like that, that it's still in a pan. And they had two different ones. Well, a little later on, we'll see they had most of the time for these earlier offerings, the grain offerings, it was unleavened bread. But here in a little bit, I think it's in this lesson, we'll see it's also the unleavened bread. The leavened bread. They would offer the unleavened bread because that's a representation of Christ with no sin. A little later on, we'll see that they also to offer the leavened bread, because why? Tastes better. It's lighter. It's got that yeast in it. Fluffier, not as heavy, and that represents man, because we have sin in us. And as they go through, and we'll talk about some more offerings, the wave offering and the heave offering, as we get through it, and that may be in chapter 8, I can't remember. But those, they offer that one on one hand and one on the other. The leavened bread and the unleavened bread, and they offer it. And if it's a different, the wave offering was a specific order, and I don't know what it was, but they waved it before the Lord. The heave offering was like you're giving it to God, back and forth. And they did that several times. And what I understood, and I maybe will hit it again here in a minute, the person offering it would have it in his hands, but the priest would have his hands underneath you doing whatever the ritual was, going up and down for a heave offering or waving it around, and it's usually fully extended, whatever they were saying that it was fully extended. So that's a representation of Christ also, because it brings the sinless man with the sin man and brings it together so God will accept it. There are just many, we go through all these different offerings that they have. Still, as you go back, it represents Christ.
The superiority of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
He covered it all.
He did. In all the different sins, all the different offerings, everything there. He made the ultimate for everything. And again, in D there, it says, talking about the grain offering, the meat or grain offering, shall belong to all the sons of Aaron, to one as much as the other. So in this particular case, they didn't divvy it up per se, they spread it all out. And I think that was pretty much the case because the meat was, whoever was leading it, they had to have, and I don't know how many they had. They served a certain time. I think we read that a few weeks ago as a week. But I can't remember if it said how many priests were on hand to do that. It'd be quite a few. But you'd still have a lot of meat.
They'd have to eat the meat pretty fast.
They do, and that's a little bit further in it. One offering, you have to eat it that day. Another offering, you can go 2 days, but you can't go a third. And anything left over on the third day, then they have to go burn. And each one of those are different, as we'll go through it here in just a minute, the different offerings, because of how it was done, it means a specific thing. And they recognize that, and that's why they're doing it this way. Do you have a question or thinking?
No, not really.
Okay.
It's just kind of confusing a lot of times because there's so much detail.
There is.
You kind of get lost.
You do. And that's why I'm so glad I don't have to worry about it.
Well, what it does is he lays it out, lays them all out.
Yeah.
Then he goes and he gets some specifics, and then he goes, they're going back and back.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I was like her. I'm like you. I'm thinking, man, I'm so thankful.
I'm also glad I'm not a priest, because boy, you'd have to remember all this and which way you do it, and how to cut it, which pieces go where, and who gets what piece, and it gets into it. I don't know if it says it in here, but one of the commentaries, whether it's the right shoulder or the left shoulder, who gets that, the guy that presented it, or the priest get it, or the right flank or the left flank. I mean,
I wonder if they had a cheat sheet.
they had to have something. I'm of the opinion that when I reached about, I don't know what age it was, but about 30 maybe, my hard drive got full, my brain, and whatever I knew back then, it went out this side. You know, new stuff come in, but the other side went out, and I forgot it. So I think we have a determinate amount of headroom in there.
Call it brain drain.
Yeah, and back then, they didn't have to worry so much about quite as much, I don't think about it, but now you look at all these. They had to learn, the priests, they had to learn, after they got started, had to learn the first 5 books that Moses wrote. They had to memorize them, okay? Not just learn them, memorize them. And then they had to learn, of course, memorizing them, you're going to understand this a little bit more. And they had people there that would explain it, too. We don't have a Jewish priest here to help us explain this. We don't really need to, because we're just studying it. We're not something that we have to go through it. Now, there are the Jewish people, they're going to go through this when they get started again with the sacrifices. They're going to, because they don't believe that Christ was the one that, was the Messiah. Okay, 11 through 14. Can you read that for us, Alice? If you don't mind.
That's okay. And this is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings, which he shall offer unto the Lord. If he offer it for thanksgiving, then he shall offer with the sacrifice of thanksgiving unleavened cakes mingled with oil, and unleavened wafers anointed with oil, and cakes mingled with oil, or of fine flour fried. Besides the cakes, he shall offer for his offering leavened bread with the sacrifice of thanksgiving in his peace offerings. And of it he shall offer one out of the whole oblation for an heave offering unto the Lord, and it shall be the priest's that sprinkleth the blood of the peace offerings.
So we jump from the transgression, or the offering for the transgression, to the peace offerings. These particular ones is not, it's one more, and we talked about this earlier, it's more of a thanksgiving. If you're thankful for something, then you can give this offering. And we'll go into it just a minute here a little more. The peace offerings, it's mentioned in chapter 3, 1 and 2. It says is often made for Thanksgiving. And it goes about, talks about the different, as I said earlier, the unleavened cakes mixed with oil. And some of these, the bread is mixed with oil, some of it's not mixed with oil. These particular ones, it's talking about the unleavened bread, cakes, which would be thicker, or wafers, which would be more like crackers. So they could make it different ways, but it's still, this is what they're offering for a thanksgiving to the Lord. If something comes about where you had a good season, good crop, you want to give a Thanksgiving offering, that's what you'd bring. You'd bring this particular one to the, and it'll say it here more in just a minute, but this is what they'd bring. They'd bring the leaven offering, and they would do this heave offering that they would say with the bread. It goes back here in Leviticus 2 and 11, says the prohibition of leaven in any offering was apparently only relevant to those which were burnt on the altar. See, these weren't burnt on the altar. These were given to the priest. They would go through the offering part of it, and then what was left was given to the priests, or what the portion of it. I don't say what was left. Portion of it, the priest would take their portion, and what was left, the person would take it. This leavened bread was that part of the peace offering ceremony, was not offered up on the altar, but presented in a heave offering. And it's also described in Leviticus 23 and 17. The leavened bread, which is used in a wave offering. And this is what I was trying to say earlier. The peace offering was accompanied by the priest holding before God, unleavened bread in one hand and leavened bread in another. And in some ritual manner, the two breads were waved before the Lord. A New Testament perspective, we may connect this to the fact that Jesus has made peace between the Jew and the Gentile, breaking down the wall that previously separated them, and Jesus Christ himself is our peace offering. So we don't have to continually keep a peace offering because of the sacrifice that he made. The peace offering is also a symbol of communion based on reconciliation. it's an offering which symbolizes two sides of a great transaction. And that talks about both God's and ours. The Godward side can only be symbolized by that which is unleavened. Like we said, no sin to it. On the other hand, there remains in man much imperfection, and this is symbolized by the leavened bread or cakes. So it says, he shall offer one cake from each offering as a heave offering to the Lord. It says, apparently when the peace offering was made as a sacrifice of thanksgiving, there was also to be this heave offering made with both an unleavened cake or wafer and with leavened bread. So you're bringing this peace offering for thanksgiving, but it's because it's a different offering because now you're making it a heave offering too. I mean, it fulfills the same purpose because they can bring it, like I said, before the burnt offering, or this particular case, it's not, it's for the peace offering. And Adam Clark says this regarding the heave offering, that it's from the Hebrew word to lift up, because the offering was lifted up towards heaven as the wave offering was, in token of the kindness of God in him granting rain and fruitful seasons and fulfilling the heart with food and gladness. And the wave offering was moved from left to right, so the heave offering was moved up and down. Both cases, this was done several times. We don't know what manner or what particular, but that's what that particular one meant. 15 through 18, you want to read that for us, Bertha?
Okay. And the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering for thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day that is offered. He shall not leave any of it until the morning. But if the sacrifice of his offering be a vow or a voluntary offering, it shall be eaten the same day that he offered his sacrifice. And on the morrow also the remainder of it shall be eaten. But the remainder of the flesh of the sacrifice on the third day shall be burnt with fire. And if any flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering be eaten at all on the third day, it shall not be accepted, neither shall be inputted unto him that offered. It shall be an abolishment, and a soul that eateth of it shall bear his iniquity. His peace offering.
And that's good. That's good, yeah.
That, now, I just can't remember all that.
It's an abomination. I mean, you don't want to do it. That's what, okay, you open the fridge. Darla, how long has this turkey been in here? I don't know. Well, I'm throwing it out. Because it don't smell very good. Well, that's a good thing. You don't want to, I mean, here we got modern day conveniences and we keep it a long time, but they couldn't they didn't have refrigerators and all that
They could
stuff.
keep it overnight.
Yeah, well, they could keep it overnight. And some of those things we would see, most of the time when they do, they'd salt it. And that would keep it, preserved for a little while. But even in the third day, where do they live? Where are we at? We're in the Middle East, and it's hot. So nothing's going to last very long. The meat's going to start rotting pretty quick. It don't take very long. So that by the third day, they're saying that's one reason why they don't do it, because it's starting to, putrefy, starting to get nasty. So God doesn't want them to eat that. So you see, this is a little different in why one offering is the same day, has to be the same day. Then this other offering, you can eat it, if it's a voluntary, you can eat it the second day too. Like I said, boy, I'd have a hard time before you let the priest. Now, do I have 1 day to eat this, or do I have 2? Because you have to ask the priest. Of course, they knew. After a few times doing it, I'm sure they knew what was going on. But we're totally out of left field. We don't know anything hardly about this. So that just kind of goes through all that, how it's going to be eaten and everything. And here again, it talks about at the very end. It says, because in such a hot country, it would actually putrefy very quickly, and it was considered to be holy. It would be very improper to expose that meat, to try to be eating it and give it to the divine being. That's one of the reasons, again, they started with the burnt offerings, because those were burnt right away, and that was given to God. These other offerings is given. It's for Thanksgiving. It's for things that helps us, but God gives it back to the people. When you bring your offering for the like we're saying, the peace offering, and you're bringing your grain, all they do is just kind of. And one person indicated in one of the commentaries, what are they doing? You know, it may be exactly what they're doing. I don't know what it was, but they offered that, and then they just gave it to the priest. The priest would get it, they'd take their portion out, they'd give it back. So it's here again, it's like giving it to God, but then God giving it back to you. Okay, the offer. So that's what they were doing, and then they had to, if it was a particular portion, then you had to eat it either that day or the next day to take care of it.
I like this under C,
Uh-huh.
where it says, perhaps this was God's way to emphasize his desire for a fresh, current relationship
With him every day, yeah.
You know, that is so relevant to us today.
Right.
We need to keep our relationship with God on a daily basis and keep it, you know, fresh, good, clean, holy.
I think that's why it's so important. Do we have our daily prayers?
Yeah.
Do we have our daily meditation, our daily Bible reading? That we keep this in, because as you're reading through, you can hit something on that day on your Bible reading and say, man, I didn't remember that, or I've never seen that before. You know, I've read through the Bible several times, and it seems like I'm reading new stuff all the time. And it's just like, wow. And that's what it is. It's keeping it fresh, keeping it, and something will occur to you. And I've been studying more about the end times, too, as I go along. One thing that I never really realized, one part, I have to remember where it was. I think it's in Luke. It's saying it's not for you to know the times and the seasons. Jesus talking to the disciples. It's not for you to know the times or the seasons. And that kind of refutes. Some people say you can know the time, and you can't know the day or the hour. Jesus said that too. But he gives us general ideas what's going to happen. And I think as people study it out more, they do. And Jesus teaches even further on it. When you start to see the fig tree, you know, blooming, you know it's getting close. And then he goes into the different parables about the different things that they have. So I'm just, here again, not a time watcher for looking for it, but we need to expect it tomorrow. I mean, he could come back tomorrow. We have to be ready either time. Yeah, we have to be ready. I don't have to say, okay, I need to get everything together because in a year somebody said he's coming back, so I got to get everything. You need to be like it's coming today, or tonight, or tomorrow, whatever, because it could. And it's like some people say, well, yeah, when I know when it's coming, I'll get right with God. No, that ain't gonna work, because you could be taken out by a car or something the next, as soon as you walk out the door. We have to be ready all the time. And there are certain things that, we need to do to keep in touch with God, to keep fresh with God. And sometimes it is, that even gets into a routine. You get in there, okay, I got 3 Bible scriptures to read this morning, let me get through these, okay.
But that's a good routine.
It's a good routine, but then it becomes a rut to us almost. So that's where we get maybe devotionals or something different. That's what I'm saying, just to throw it in, to make it a little better. We're still reading the Bible, but we're reading either commentary with it or something. We just have to get into it and keep it as fresh as possible. Because how many times did God part the sea for Moses? Or not even Moses. How many times did he part the sea? 2 that I know of, Moses and Elijah. Elijah, he parted the Jordan for Elijah. But he only did it a couple times. Here again, he's not going to do the same thing, everything. I still like that saying up here in The Chosen, get used to different. Because he's going to do different things. We're looking for the fire to fall from heaven and all that. I don't know what's going to happen. We just need to look in anticipation what's going to happen.
Well, it's like we was talking about, this has been written.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're not adding any more to the Bible, but
No.
you go, like you said, you go through and read something you've read before.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, it's like something jumps at you.
Brand new.
Yeah.
That's right.
So,
Or somebody's preaching on it, or somebody's teaching you, listening, and you read through that again, and it's like, I think I understand that now. You know, I've read it all along, and I give this a little epiphany I had the other day. I was reading in Acts, and I have no clue where I got this from. I think I know, but it's from me. But when I was reading, and Philip was teaching the eunuch about, when he's reading in Isaiah, and he said, is this somebody that's already came, or is this somebody, who is this guy talking about? In my mind, because I've watched The Chosen, I had blotted out Philip as a disciple. I thought this Philip, the deacon. That in my mind, Philip was a deacon. But then it's like, no, stupid, it's Philip the evangelist. That's why they call him the evangelist. And it's just like, boom, light bulb went out in my head, I'm like, wow, I thought about that, so much. And I'm like, okay, I get that now. Okay, it was Philip that was, the evangelist that was doing this stuff and preaching. I don't know, Philip the deacon may have been doing stuff too, but he's supposed to be waiting on tables. That's his job. So, one of those things. So, anyway, that's kind of my realization. New things hit you every day if you'll read with an open mind of what's going on. Verse 19 through 21. And the flesh that toucheth any unclean thing shall not be eaten. It shall be burnt with fire. And as for the flesh, all that shall be clean shall eat thereof. But the soul that eateth of the flesh of the sacrifice of peace offerings that pertain unto the Lord, having his uncleanness upon him, even that soul shall be cut off from his people. Moreover, the soul that shall touch any unclean thing, as the uncleanness of man, or the unclean beast, or any abominable unclean thing, and eat the flesh of the sacrifice of peace offerings, which pertain unto the Lord, even that soul shall be cut off from his people. Now, what does that mean? Even that shall be cut off from his people. It says that twice in there. You're out of here. You're out of being a Jew. You're out of being an Israel. You may still be born that way. And what this means is, if you're doing it intentionally, that's what I think it means. If you know not to do that and you do it, they're pretty serious about it.
does it mean just like shunned, or does it mean they actually killed the person?
I don't think they killed them, but they kicked them out. They couldn't go. They wasn't traveling with them anymore. Which, if you're a lone person out there by yourself, you're not going to be living very long. I think in some places it could very well be killed, because we see that later on. In this particular case, it's just like, you have learned this. Moses taught you this, and now you still did it. And we see that a little later on. People are killed when they bring these things up, and not this particular one, but they are serious about this. So they're saying, okay, you're not listening to the rules. You've had 3 strikes, you're out.
Again, they go over it and over
That's right.
it and over it.
That's right.
And each time they get a little more specific. And I mean, it's just like, when David, they found, and they were returning the ark back to the temple there, and how the priests, and it sounds terrible that it was about to fall. Well, first of all, they were moving it the wrong way.
Right. Right.
And then the proper ones that were moving it weren't moving it.
Right.
And when you really, it's like, and it happens every day. Somebody that breaks the law and they get caught, and they blame everybody else.
Yeah, except them.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
But the law was there.
That's right.
Well, he shouldn't have. No, the law was there. Sometimes it seems like that God he's not very merciful, but he is, because he teaches us, like you said, over and over and over again.
One of the things that we don't understand quite is because the quote Sabbath. Back in the show, they weren't to do any work on the Sabbath. Their work, as the disciples, they were fishermen, most of them. So they couldn't do any work. They couldn't go out and fish. But yet, they found a clause, the Pharisees did, well, if your family's going to suffer, you can do that. And that's what Peter was hanging on. Simon was hanging on. He said, well, my family's, I'm going to lose my boat, I'm going to lose my house, I've got to go. So they'll forgive that. But we've got to be real careful when we're going into that, because that's what you're starting to get into here. And part of this is, well, I can offer this, sacrifice, even though, and what do we have today? We have the communion. What do? They go, anybody that takes unworthily, you better be careful, because that's what he said, that you need to be consecrated before God before you do these.
Well, they chose to. If they were outcasted because they touched something unclean, they knew better. They made the choice.
And this is not saying that. This is saying if they knew that they were doing it. Sometimes they'll go about and it'll come about. Once they find out, there is a sacrifice that they can make to get out of it. But this is dependent. The wording as they go through here, if you want to read through what it says, it's very specific that they're doing it on purpose. And if they're doing it on purpose, they've been warned. They know different. So they can be kicked out.
And they still chose to do it.
And they still chose to do it, exactly. 23 through 25, Brother Epperson.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, Ye shall not eat no manner of fat of ox, or of sheep, or of goats, and the fat of the beast that dieth of itself, and the fat of that which is torn with beast, may be used in any other use, but ye shall in no wise eat of it. For whosoever eateth of the fat of the beast, or which men have offered an offering made by fire unto the Lord, even the soul that eateth shall be cut off from his people.
Okay. So here, you're not supposed to eat fat. Tell me, this is, you can't do that. I wouldn't want to do that, like I said. To me, fat, I'm probably over the top on that. We had ham this Thanksgiving, and we didn't cook it. I think Darla's mom brought it, but it had quite a bit on the backside of it, and we got that portion. It was sliced off. Man, I was going through making my sandwich. I was picking every little bit of that off because I don't like that stuff. I don't like. I know I'll eat bacon, and bacon's got fat in it, but I don't know. In my mind, it's just I can get that stuff off. It's just different. So that's what you shall not eat any fat of ox or sheep or goat. Under the old covenant, an Israelite could not eat the large fatty portions of an animal. This is true of all the animals offered in sacrifices, and even an animal that dies naturally or was dead and torn by wild beasts. The law was the same. You shall by no means eat it. So, it's one of those things that today we don't see it quite as much anymore, but some people see a deer alongside the road. If they just saw it got hit, they'll get out there and get it, harvest it, take it in. But for them, that wouldn't be good because it hit the ground. It's unclean because it was killed even naturally. It's torn by beasts. To me, a car would be a beast because it got hit. And here again, it goes about and says the fat of the animal represents its goodness, its abundance, and it belonged to God. And additionally, the fat is the stored energy of that animal that belongs to God. But what it is, the pagans would eat that, thinking that they would gain strength and they would gain power because they're eating the fat of that animal and the blood of that animal. And if they ate the fat of the animal which the men offered for an offering, that's prohibited too. You can't do that. Even the priest couldn't do that, okay? It says, as with, talking about being cut off, as with the previous law against ceremonially unclean persons eating the meat, the penalty for violating this law was severe, excommunication from the community of God's people. 19 offenses resulted in a person receiving the punishment of being cut off in the Old Testament. Offenses resulted in the offender being cut off included violation of the holy days, okay, including the Sabbath, committing moral offenses, violating purity laws such as eating the blood and failure to circumcise on the 8th day. They're pretty strict about what it is that you're not going to be a part of. They're gonna shun you. It's just like when Matthew became a tax collector, his family shunned him because he was working with the Romans, and the Romans was, an occupier. They wouldn't. That's just not, they're killing our country. Is what they would think. So, Janet, 26 and 27.
Moreover, you shall eat no manner of blood, whether it be of fowl or a beast, in any of your dwellings. Whatsoever soul it be that eateth any manner of blood, even that soul shall be cut off from his people.
So that's, again, as we talked about, the blood, the life is in the blood. That's reiterated back, whether it's a person or an animal. And God tells us the power is in the blood. By the blood of Christ is how we were saved. And one of the things that was interesting that I remember that's talking about goes back to Adam and Eve. When they found out they were naked, what did God do?
God made them some clothes.
They were given some skins and they covered themselves. So they made it. How did he make those skins? He had to kill something. He had to sacrifice an animal. And because of that, that's realization going back. That was probably the first sacrifice. And it was going back to this time. And as Adam was the priest, being the priest, the only one there, he was the one, God gave him the skins for that sacrifice. Now we don't know that exactly for sure, but it sure sounds like it would be right. Because we don't know. We're not told back then. It just said God gave them some skins to wear. I think it's what it says, something to that effect. It says, one would think this was but a little sin, yet how fearfully it is threatened. No sin can be little, because there is no little God to sin against. I thought that was pretty good. Everybody says, oh, it's just a little white lie. I don't care what color a lie is, it's a lie. And we have to be careful of what we say, because sometimes what we say has got to be true. And we've got to be careful that we're not misleading something, when we say it. Because sometimes we know that words can be twisted. And if you say something just right, it'll sound good, but it's not right. 28 through 31. Alice?
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, He that offereth the sacrifice of his peace offerings unto the Lord shall bring his oblation unto the Lord of the sacrifice of his peace offerings. Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah, that's right.
His own hand shall bring the offerings of the Lord made by fire, the fat with the breast. It shall be he bring, that the breast may be waved for a wave offering before the Lord. And the priest shall burn the fat upon the altar, but the breast shall be Aaron's and his sons.
And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Part of it, this breast, and they go back and it specifies, and I think here in a little bit, in the next couple of scriptures, the right shoulder. In this particular on the breast, it doesn't say, but they think it goes back to all of the different offerings that is made. So they're bringing this before for this wave offering that they're giving, this peace offering. It's just for the breast portion of this animal is given, and that whole thing goes to the priest. But then the other side of the breast offering, breast is for the person, okay? But he has to bring it, and it says in his own hands. That's where we get where the person waving it before the Lord, the priest is showing them, exactly how they're doing this.
Don't you think people think it's nuts? I stood up and started waving
That's right.
breasts and stuff, and
Well, you
and
look at some of the old camp meetings that they have, things, people jumping around and hopping, and people, what are they making fools of themselves? Well, it's what the Lord's telling them to do, and we don't quite understand what the Lord tells us to do today. Let's go ahead and read 32, 33, and 34. Bertha?
And the right shoulder shall he give unto the priest for a payment offering and the sacrifice of your peace offering. He among the sons of Aaron that offered the blood of the peace offerings, and the fat shall have the right shoulder for his part. For the wave breast and the heave shoulder have I taken of the children of Israel from off the sacrifices of their peace offerings, and have given them unto Aaron and the priest and unto his sons by a statute forever from among the children of Israel.
Okay. So this is where I was talking about. One is given to the priest, and the other side, the person that's giving it gets it back. It's like you give it to the God, they do the wave offering, and you get it back. So each one of them, it says presumably the left thigh of the animal was given to the person or the Israelite who brought the offering, so they could enjoy the meat from the sacrifice in a fellowship meal. But the rules still apply. You got to eat it that day or the next day. It depends on what kind of offering you're given. And same thing when they give the offering for the heave offering, the bread that they have, the different 35 and 36. This is the portion of the anointing of Aaron and the anointing of his sons out of the offerings of the Lord made by fire in the day when he presented them to minister unto the Lord in the priest's office, which the Lord commanded to be given them of the children of Israel in the day that he anointed them by a statute forever throughout their generations. I'm going to go ahead and read 37 and 38 also. It's the last two scriptures. This is the law of the burnt offering, of the meat offering, or what we call the grain offering, and the sin offering, and the trespass offering, and of the consecrations, of the sacrifice of the peace offerings, which the Lord commanded Moses in Mount Sinai in the day that he commanded the children of Israel to offer their oblations unto the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. So this is finishing up. The first few chapters here was on the different offerings. We started at the end of Exodus by them erecting the tabernacle and getting ready for it. Now he was teaching them. These first few chapters are teaching them. And now we're going to get into some more laws and rules as we go in further into Leviticus, as we go further into this. So this is just kind of a summary, the last four scriptures that we read, of what the previous 6 and 7 chapters were. And there's a lot of good information back there. Since we've been here quite a while, I'm not going to hold you to go through it, but you can read it. It gives you a lot of good information.
Very interesting. So what we don't have to memorize all that.
I'm glad to.
And you're right, when you're reading it, you can read it clearly, but it's confusing.
Well, yeah. Well, so many times it's the offerings that we said, or the things, the innards, what's the innards? We would say, well, that's the guts, or something like that. But we really, and not being somebody that has butchered an animal, per se, I don't know exactly what it is.
Whenever we do, like a deer after, it's been killed.
Yeah.
You slice that underbelly.
Right.
you know, and all that stuff
Comes out.
Comes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that because the one, I think I may have told you this, I'll go ahead. See y'all later. Cut this off. We had a deer, the lady next door